7 years ago, I had a breakdown. Maybe a midlife crisis, but I was only 33, so I'm not really that big of an overachiever. I had just lost a job that defined me, a job that had become my identity. I was in a failing marriage that was not unlike that job, and as that marriage slipped through my fingers, I didn't know which way was up. It was in that fragile state that I made one last-ditch effort to prove myself lovable, to prove myself worthy, to prove myself a rock star. I entered the Bridger Ridge Run. For those of you unfamiliar, the Ed Anaker Bridger Ridge Run is 20 miles at 10,000 feet. Not for the faint of heart.
And that's like when you said, I've got broken toenails, I've got, it's like just kind of fill in some story.
I know, okay.
That's what I'm taking back in. So go ahead and try it again. So it's like,
Okay.
and it's like once you start,
Yeah, because that got me right to where I needed to be when you said that.
where you're going to go, just kind of fill it in and then get it.
Okay. Should I start over at the beginning?
Start again.
Yeah, I know, I'm getting an editor for these. 7 years ago, I had a breakdown. Call it a midlife crisis, but I was 33 and I'm not that much of an overachiever. I was in a failing marriage and I had just lost a job I loved. A job that defined me. A job that had become my identity, almost like that marriage. A marriage quickly slipping through my hands. A marriage that had saved me from so many indiscretions of my 20s as I stumbled through my 20s. At that point in my life, I didn't know which way was up. And it was in that fragile state that I made one last-ditch effort to prove myself. To prove myself worthy, to prove myself lovable, to prove myself a rock star. I entered the Bridger Ridge Run. For those of you unfamiliar, the Ed Anaker Bridger Ridge Run is a Brosman tradition. 20 miles at 10,000 feet, not for the faint of heart. I don't know how many of you have been long-distance runners, but for me, the day of the race is often a relief. It means all those grueling training runs are behind me, and all I have to do is finish. That day, I was not in my prime. I had stayed up late the night before. I had too much to drink. It was, after all, the summer of my discontent. As the starting gun went off, I was in one of the later waves to start up the steep switchbacks up the back of Sacagawea. I was so excited to hit the top of Sacagawea in under an hour. This meant I wouldn't have it was unlikely I would have trouble making the rest of the checkpoints that they can pull you off the trail if you don't make them in time to finish the race before nightfall. After Sacagawea was the part of the trail I had never seen before, and it was gorgeous. Every practice run I had gotten lost at this point, but fortunately the 100 runners or so in front of me had pounded the soft earth to a point I couldn't get lost. As I ran down those trails in the shade on the sloping trail, I was in my prime. I was fueling, I was drinking water, I was happy. And then I got to the next part. Although this area was shaded, and it lulled me into thinking I would be on a pleasant hike, the soft earth and the steep mountain made backsliding the norm. More often than once, I tumbled backward, still gripping the twigs I was holding onto for support. After exiting the woods atop that challenging area, I stood on boulders the size of my house, Even with 100 runners in front of me, there wasn't a trace, and I was lost. At this point, the field had thinned to the point where there was scores of yards between me and the next runner. Luckily, I didn't get so off pace that I was unfindable, and a small group of friendly runners came and found me. They had licorice too. As I topped Bridger, the cheering fans who climbed the mountain that morning to buoy our spirits did the trick. And that was lucky because Saddle Peak was next. The climb, and I would love to call it a run, but it was more of a trudge, up the side of that mountain with no shade and the sun beating down stole the rest of my energy and my hydration. As I got to Baldy, one of the last checkpoints, I was in a panic. I was hyperventilating. I was terrified. I saw a storm coming in from Livingston, about 20 miles away. I was bankrupt of confidence and courage, and I didn't know what to do. Had there been another way off that mountain, I would have taken it gladly. On the one hand, I was scared and depleted. On the other hand, I had run this part of the trail almost every day all summer, and it was downhill. I don't remember much of the rest of the run. I was on autopilot. I knew I was going to finish, and I knew everything was going to be okay.